Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to understand ourselves. These words from Carl Jung cut through modern psychology. But Jung went deeper than this surface wisdom. He understood something most people never grasp. Toxic people don't create your emotional reactions. They simply find the buttons that were already there, waiting. Jung spent decades studying the human psyche, diving into the darkest corners of consciousness. He discovered that toxic behavior from others is often just a mirror, reflecting our own unintegrated shadows. The people who can destroy your peace with a single word, who can make you question your worth with a glance, who can turn your day upside down with their presence. They're not powerful because they're inherently destructive. They're powerful because they've found the keys to doors you didn't even know existed within your own mind. You know that feeling, don't you? When someone says, exactly, the right thing to make your blood boil, when a single comment can ruin your entire day, when you find yourself replaying conversations, crafting perfect comebacks hours after the fact. You tell yourself you're stronger, that you shouldn't let them get to you. But they do, every single time. Maybe it's the co-worker who undermines your confidence with an eye roll. Maybe it's the family member who knows which wounds to poke. Maybe it's the friend who disguises attacks as concern. Maybe it's the stranger online who triggers something so deep. You can't stop thinking about their words for days. You've tried everything. You've tried to be rational, to rise above it, to take the high road. You've read self-help books that say, just ignore them. You've practiced breathing techniques, positive affirmations, but nothing works. The buttons are still there. And somehow, these people always find them. What's even more frustrating is that you know you're not weak. You've handled real challenges. You've overcome obstacles. You've demonstrated strength in countless situations. Yet these particular people can reduce you to a reactive child, with seemingly no effort at all. They know exactly which words to say, which tone to use. It's as if they have a secret manual to your psychological vulnerabilities. This isn't about having thin skin or being too sensitive. This is about walking through life as an exposed nerve, vulnerable to every careless word, every subtle manipulation. You become a puppet dancing to strings you can't see, pulled by people who know which wounds to press. Your energy bleeds out through 1,000 tiny cuts. Your peace of mind becomes hostage to other people's moods. You lose yourself in the maze of reactions, always defending, always explaining, always trying to prove your worth. The worst part is the aftermath. After the trigger, after the emotional hijacking, you're left with the wreckage. You analyze every word you said, every expression you made. You wonder why you couldn't stay calm, why you let them get to you again. The shame spirals deeper than the original hurt. You start to avoid these people, but avoidance becomes its own prison. You alter your routes, change your schedules. You become smaller, more careful, more guarded. Your authentic self gets buried under layers of protection. The energy drain is enormous. You wake up tired from dreams where you're still fighting yesterday's battles. You find yourself having conversations with people who aren't there. Your attention becomes scattered across a minefield of triggers. Perhaps the cruelest aspect is how it affects your relationships with people who genuinely care about you. You become hypervigilant, scanning for signs of manipulation. You interpret innocent comments through the lens of your wounds. You push away love because you're so tired of being hurt. This isn't drama. This isn't weakness. This is profound psychological reality. You've been told to just ignore them or don't take it personally. But Jung knew better. He understood these buttons exist for a reason. And toxic people are skilled archaeologists of the human psyche, excavating buried wounds. The conventional wisdom about dealing with toxic people is not just inadequate, it's harmful. It suggests the problem is your reaction. It implies you should simply be stronger, more detached. But this ignores the fundamental truth Jung discovered. These reactions are not random, they're not weakness, and they're not something to be eliminated. These emotional buttons are sophisticated early warning systems, developed over years of experience to protect you from danger. They're your psyche's attempt to map human interaction. The problem isn't that you have these buttons. It's that you don't understand what they're trying to tell you. When someone pushes your buttons, they're activating a complex, psychological program written years ago by experiences that taught you where danger lies. The person in front of you might be completely different from the original programmer of that button, but your nervous system doesn't know that. Jung understood that people immune to toxic behavior haven't eliminated their buttons. They've become conscious of them. They've done the archaeological work themselves. They know where their vulnerabilities lie, what triggers them, and why. This knowledge doesn't make them invulnerable. It makes them sovereign. The solution isn't to build thicker skin or become emotionally numb. The solution is far more radical, far more transformative. It requires you to become master of your own emotional landscape, to own your shadows so completely that no one else can use them, to turn from unconscious reactor to conscious responder, from victim of your own psychology to master of your inner world. There's a reason some people seem immune to toxic behavior, while others crumble at the slightest provocation. It's not genetics, it's not luck, it's not even confidence. Carl Jung discovered something psychology misses entirely. The people who can't be manipulated are those who have made peace with their own darkness. Jung called these vulnerable spots our emotional complexes, autonomous clusters of psychic energy that operate below consciousness. Think of them as emotional landmines buried in your psyche, each one connected to an unresolved wound, an unacknowledged fear. But Jung's understanding went far deeper than trauma responses. He discovered that these complexes have a life of their own. They're not just memories, they're active psychological entities. They influence your thoughts, feelings, and behaviors in ways you don't consciously recognize. They're like separate personalities living within your larger personality, each with their own agenda, their own fears, their own protection. When someone triggers these complexes, you're not responding to what's happening now. You're responding to what happened then, perhaps years ago, perhaps in childhood. The toxic person becomes a key that unlocks doors. You thought you'd sealed forever. But here's the crucial insight. They're not picking the lock. You gave them the key through your own unconscious projections. Every complex has what Jung called a nuclear element, a core wound or fear that gives it power. This might be the fear of abandonment that was formed when a parent left. It might be the fear of inadequacy created by constant criticism. It might be the fear of being unseen that developed from being ignored. These nuclear elements become gravitational centers, around which entire constellations of thoughts and feelings revolve. But here's what Jung understood that changes everything. These complexes aren't your enemies, they're your teachers. Every button that can be pushed is showing you exactly where your psychological sovereignty has been compromised. Every emotional reaction is a map leading back to a piece of yourself you've disowned. The genius of Jung's approach is that he didn't see these complexes as pathological symptoms to be eliminated. He saw them as autonomous aspects of the psyche that needed to be understood, integrated, and ultimately befriended. The goal isn't to get rid of your complexes, it's to develop a conscious relationship with them. Think of it this way. Imagine your psyche as a vast house. Most people live in just a few rooms, the ones that feel safe and familiar. But the other rooms are still there, still part of the house. These hidden rooms are where your complexes live. They don't disappear just because you ignore them. In fact, they often become more powerful when relegated to the shadows. Toxic people are like unwelcome visitors who somehow know exactly which doors to open, which rooms to enter. They create chaos in your psychological house because they have access to rooms you don't even know exist. But when you become conscious of these rooms, when you explore them yourself, understand their history, you become the master of your own house again. In our hyper-connected world, these vulnerabilities have become weapons of mass destruction. Social media algorithms feed on your insecurities, turning your scroll into a minefield of comparison and inadequacy. Toxic colleagues know exactly how to undermine your confidence with a single eye roll or dismissive comment. Family members push buttons they installed decades ago, reducing you to a frustrated child with a few well-placed words. The workplace becomes a battlefield where your need for approval is weaponized against you. That boss who withholds praise isn't just being difficult. They're activating your complex around worthiness. That colleague who takes credit for your ideas isn't just being selfish. They're triggering your complex around being invisible. That coworker who always finds fault isn't just being critical. They're poking your complex around perfectionism. Relationships become power struggles where your fear of abandonment is used to control your behavior. The partner who threatens to leave during every argument isn't just being dramatic, they're manipulating your abandonment complex. The friend who makes you feel guilty for having boundaries isn't just being needy, they're exploiting your complex around being responsible for others' emotions. Even strangers on the internet can send you into emotional tailspins because they've accidentally struck one of your hidden complexes. The modern digital landscape has created an environment where these psychological vulnerabilities are constantly exposed and exploited. Every notification is a potential trigger. Every social media post is a potential comparison. Every online interaction is a potential source of validation or rejection. We're living in a state of chronic psychological exposure, with our emotional complexes constantly activated by forces we don't understand. You find yourself editing your authentic self to avoid triggering others' reactions, but in doing so, you create new vulnerabilities. You become a stranger to yourself, living in constant fear of the next emotional ambush. The speed of modern communication means triggers can hit you instantly. Before you have time to process or respond consciously, a text message can ruin your day. An email can send you into an anxiety spiral. A social media post can make you question your entire worldview. We're expected to handle this constant bombardment with the same psychological equipment our ancestors used to deal with occasional face-to-face conflicts. But perhaps most insidiously, modern culture has created what Jung might have called collective complexes. Shared psychological vulnerabilities that entire groups of people carry. The complex around success and failure. The complex around appearance and aging. The complex around productivity and worth. The complex around safety and danger. These collective complexes make us vulnerable to manipulation on a massive scale through advertising, politics, and social pressure. Jung understood that within each of us lives what he called the shadow, the collection of everything we've rejected about ourselves. On one side stands your conscious self, the person you believe yourself to be. On the other side lurks your shadow, containing all the traits you've denied, all the emotions you've suppressed, all the aspects of humanity you've decided are not you. This creates a civil war within your psyche. The more you deny your shadow, the more power it has over you. The more you try to be perfect, the more imperfection controls you. The more you try to be strong, the more your weakness becomes a liability. Toxic people aren't creating these battles. They're simply pointing out the wars you're already fighting with yourself. Your anger at others' selfishness reveals your own suppressed selfishness. Your judgment of others' neediness exposes your own unmet needs. Your fury at others' dishonesty illuminates your own relationship with truth. Jung called this projection, seeing in others what you refuse to see in yourself. But the shadow isn't just negative traits. It also contains your unrealized potential, your undeveloped strengths, your untapped creativity. When you reject parts of yourself, you don't just push away the negative, you also push away the positive. The person who denies their capacity for anger also denies their capacity for healthy assertiveness. The person who rejects their selfishness also rejects their ability to set healthy boundaries. The person who suppresses their sexuality also suppresses their creative life force. This internal fragmentation creates what Jung called complexes, autonomous psychological entities that operate independently of your conscious will. These complexes are like inner personalities that have their own agenda, their own fears, their own methods of self-protection. They're the parts of you that react before you can think, that make decisions before you can choose, that create patterns before you can recognize them. The shadow operates according to its own logic, often in direct opposition to your conscious intentions. You want to be kind, but your shadow makes you cruel. You want to be confident, but your shadow makes you insecure. You want to be authentic, but your shadow makes you perform. This internal conflict creates a psychological tension that others can sense and exploit. Toxic people are skilled at recognizing these internal conflicts. They can sense when someone is at war with themselves, when someone is trying to be something they're not, when someone is denying aspects of their own nature. They become skilled at activating these internal conflicts, turning your own psychological splits against you. The person who triggers your anger knows that you're trying to be the good person who never gets angry. They know your conscious self is invested in this image, so they know exactly how to make you act in ways that contradict your self-image. The person who makes you feel small knows that you're trying to be the confident person who never feels insecure. They know your conscious self is invested in this image, so they know exactly how to make you feel the insecurity you're trying to hide. But Jung discovered something revolutionary. When you integrate your shadow, when you make peace with the parts of yourself you've rejected, you become psychologically whole. You no longer have internal conflicts that others can exploit. You no longer have hidden aspects of yourself that can be used against you. You become a unified psychological entity, sovereign over your own inner landscape. But Jung went even deeper. He discovered that these emotional buttons aren't random. They follow patterns, archetypal structures, that repeat across cultures and throughout history. The bully who makes you feel small is activating your relationship with power. The person who abandons you is triggering your relationship with love. The critic who makes you feel worthless is exposing your relationship with your own value. These aren't just personal wounds, they're universal human themes, playing out in your individual psyche. The toxic person becomes a character in your personal mythology, forcing you to confront the fundamental questions of existence. Am I worthy? Am I safe? Am I loved? Am I enough? Understanding this changes everything. The person who pushes your buttons isn't your enemy. They're your involuntary therapist, showing you exactly where your psychological work needs to be done. They're the mirror reflecting back the parts of yourself you haven't yet integrated. In our current age, this dynamic has become more complex and dangerous. Social media has created a breeding ground for toxic behavior, where people can push buttons anonymously and at scale. The fragmentation of community means we're more isolated, and therefore more vulnerable to manipulation. The pace of modern life means we rarely have time to process our emotional reactions before the next trigger comes along. We're living in a state of chronic emotional activation, constantly reacting to stimuli that wouldn't have existed even 50 years ago. Our nervous systems are overwhelmed, our boundaries are blurred, and our capacity for self-reflection has been hijacked by the demands of constant connectivity. This creates a perfect storm for emotional manipulation. We're more vulnerable than ever, yet less equipped than ever to understand and integrate our vulnerabilities. We're surrounded by people who've learned to exploit psychological weaknesses without having the wisdom to heal them. Here's the paradox Jung discovered. The people who appear strongest are often the most vulnerable to emotional manipulation. They've built their identity on being invulnerable, which means they can't acknowledge their wounds. They can't heal what they won't admit exists. Their strength becomes a prison, and their invulnerability becomes their greatest vulnerability. The person who never gets angry is enslaved by their anger. The person who never shows need is controlled by their neediness. The person who never admits fear is terrorized by their fears. Toxic people can sense these hidden contradictions, like sharks sensing blood in the water. True emotional sovereignty doesn't come from eliminating your buttons. It comes from owning them so completely that no one else can use them against you. It comes from integrating your shadow so thoroughly that projection becomes impossible. It comes from making peace with your humanity so completely that no one can shame you for being human. We've traveled deep into the labyrinth of human psychology, following Jung's insights into the nature of emotional vulnerability. We've seen how toxic people don't create our buttons. They simply find the ones that were already there, installed by our own unconscious processes of denial and projection. We've understood that these vulnerabilities aren't flaws to be eliminated, but teachers to be integrated. You are not broken, you are not weak, you are not flawed for having emotional reactions. You are human, and your humanity includes the full spectrum of psychological experience. The toxic people in your life aren't your enemies. They're your unwitting allies in the journey toward wholeness. But here's the transformative promise. When you master your emotional secrets, when you own your shadow completely, when you integrate your vulnerabilities, instead of hiding them, you become psychologically invulnerable. Not because you don't feel, but because you feel everything consciously. Not because you don't have buttons, but because you own every button so completely that no one else can push them. This is possible. This is achievable. This is the path Jung mapped out for us over a century ago. And it remains the most radical and effective approach to emotional sovereignty ever discovered. The first step isn't to eliminate your emotional reactions, it's to study them with the curiosity of a scientist. When someone pushes your buttons, instead of defending or attacking, ask yourself, what wound is this touching? What part of myself am I seeing in this person? What is this emotional reaction trying to teach me? Begin to notice your projections. When you have a strong emotional reaction, write down what you're judging about them. Then ask yourself, how might this trait exist in me? When have I acted this way? What would it mean to accept this aspect of humanity in myself? Start having conversations with your shadow. Instead of trying to be perfect, become curious about your imperfections. Instead of trying to be strong all the time, explore your vulnerabilities. Instead of trying to be good, examine your capacity for selfishness, anger, and pettiness. This isn't about becoming these negative traits. It's about owning them so completely that they can't be used against you. When you know your own darkness, you can't be shamed for it. When you accept your own humanity, you can't be controlled by it. But Jung's approach goes deeper than simple self-acceptance. He understood that the goal isn't just to tolerate your shadow, it's to integrate it consciously. This means developing a relationship with the rejected parts of yourself, understanding their function and purpose, and finding healthy ways to express their energy. Your anger, for example, isn't just a negative emotion to be controlled. It's also your inner guardian, protecting your boundaries and signaling when something is wrong. When you reject your anger completely, you also reject your ability to protect yourself. When you integrate your anger consciously, you can access its protective power without being controlled by its destructive force. Your selfishness isn't just a character flaw to be eliminated. It's also your inner advocate, ensuring that your needs are met and your boundaries are respected. When you reject your selfishness completely, you also reject your ability to care for yourself. When you integrate your selfishness consciously, you can access its self-caring power without being controlled by greed. This process of integration requires what Jung called holding the tension of opposites. Instead of choosing between being good or bad, strong or weak, loving or angry, you learn to hold space for both aspects. You become large enough to contain your contradictions, complex enough to embrace your paradoxes, conscious enough to choose how to express your various aspects. Practice what Jung called active imagination. Dialogue with the parts of yourself you've rejected. When you feel triggered, instead of immediately reacting, pause and ask, what part of me is being activated right now? What does this part need? What is it trying to protect? Give voice to these rejected aspects. Let them speak. Listen to their concerns. Understand their fears. Begin to see toxic people as characters in your personal mythology, rather than enemies to be defeated. They're playing roles in your psychological development, forcing you to confront aspects of yourself you might otherwise avoid. This doesn't mean you have to tolerate abuse. It means you can extract the psychological gold from these difficult encounters. Develop what Jung called psychological sovereignty, the ability to remain centered in your own truth, regardless of external pressures. This isn't about becoming arrogant or closed off. It's about becoming so grounded in your own reality that others' opinions and manipulations lose their power over you. Create boundaries that protect your psychological space, while remaining open to genuine connection. Learn to distinguish between people who are genuinely trying to connect and people who are trying to manipulate you. The former deserve your openness, the latter deserve your boundaries. Most importantly, remember that this is a lifelong practice, not a destination. You'll continue to discover new complexes, new shadows, new areas where your psychological sovereignty can be strengthened. Each toxic encounter becomes an opportunity for deeper self-understanding. Each trigger becomes a doorway to greater integration. Practice what Jung called active imagination. Dialogue with the parts of yourself you've rejected. When you feel triggered, instead of immediately reacting, pause and ask, what part of me is being activated right now? What does this part need? What is it trying to protect? Begin to see toxic people as characters in your personal mythology, rather than enemies to be defeated. They're playing roles in your psychological development, forcing you to confront aspects of yourself you might otherwise avoid. This doesn't mean you have to tolerate abuse. It means you can extract the psychological gold from these difficult encounters. The journey toward emotional sovereignty is not a destination, it's a way of being. It's a commitment to conscious living, to owning your full humanity, to becoming so psychologically integrated that manipulation becomes impossible. What emotional buttons do you recognize in yourself? What patterns of reactivity have you noticed? What would it mean for you to own these vulnerabilities so completely that no one else could use them against you? If this resonates with you, if you're ready to continue this journey of self-discovery and integration, we're going to dive deeper into Jung's revolutionary insights, exploring the practical applications of shadow work, the art of projection withdrawal, and the path to authentic psychological freedom. Remember, you are not at the mercy of toxic people. You are not a victim of your emotional reactions. You are a sovereign being with the power to master your inner landscape so completely that no external force can disturb your peace. The journey begins with a single step, the courage to look honestly at yourself, to own your shadows, and to reclaim your psychological sovereignty. The toxic people in your life are about to discover that all the buttons they thought they could push belong to someone else now. They belong to you. And you're no longer available to be manipulated, controlled, or diminished by anyone who hasn't done the work to master themselves. This is your invitation to that mastery. This is your call to psychological sovereignty. This is your opportunity to become the person who cannot be broken because they've learned to embrace their own brokenness so completely that it becomes their greatest strength. The journey awaits. Will you take the first step?